of like what hardware generation we're on.
Yeah, and maybe they're sitting on some data that indicates that, I don't know, the original might eat into sales for the new one. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, it all
One theory.
right? Like all that money goes to them regardless. Um, yeah, I don't know. I hadn't thought about the fact that the original one isn't available. Like if you were to load up, the like uh PlayStation's storefront and you look for Last of Us, like the first one, like the remastered version would probably be what's shown first. And
Yeah.
I don't even know if you can buy the original. So
How was your experience working with Neil Druckmann? Because obviously you played a part, or you worked with him in regards to Riley, right?
mhm.
And you had a productive meeting, I suppose, with him. But what was your experience overall working with him?
Yeah, so for the DLC, I had moved on to Uncharted 4, and the one of the lead concept artists came over, and it was, she's a friend of mine, and we were talking, and she was like, "Oh, by the way, Neil might come by and like ask you some questions because we were talking about character development stuff." So she kind of gave me a heads up. And then so when Neil asked if I would be interested in working with him on character development stuff for Riley, which is the secondary character that Ellie, Ellie's best friend slash like childhood, I guess like love interest. Um, I was like, really, me? Like, as a texture artist, I was like, that sounds awesome. I would love to help out with that.
Did
Um,
you have much of a relationship with Neil prior to that point?
no,
Had you
uh,
spoken to him much?
nope. I
No.
don't think I've ever had a conversation with him prior to that. So it was kind of like, oh, why does Neil want to talk to me? Like, what? What? Um, so yeah, I mean, it was, initially it was just like, wow, it's really cool, but also kind of like intimidating. But it ultimately ended up just being like conversations around like what, forms of media that portrayed stories about lesbians and, in positive ways, or, which turned out there weren't many of them at that time. So we ended up mostly having conversations around like my coming of age and what it was like for me, like growing up, uh, as a like closeted, queer kid, not having really anybody to talk to about it when I was growing up. So just having conversations around that, and then as production started moving forward, I was pulled in some of the conversations around like auditioning for the secondary character. He sent me like 10 different women that had auditioned for this particular role. It was just asking me like, oh, who are your top three, basically. And so, getting some input on that, being able to just have some like conversations on some of the moment to moment beats when Riley and Ellie are kind of hanging out in the mall, because there's some similarities with like my coming of age story in malls. So a lot of that kind of tracks. Um, and then, just like conversations at the end about the kiss, and just little bits and pieces here and there, as development went on. So it was a very interesting experience having that kind of exposure to the high level creative, when normally I would just be like heads down making art and not really getting that kind of exposure. So yeah, it ended up being really cool.
And you worked on The Last of Us Part 2 for about a year. Was it a similar sort of thing with Last of Us Part 2? Did he seek you out at all or get
So
your views on anything?
when he pitched the main story for two while I was in the middle of that horrific crunch with Lost Legacy.
Mm.
And so there were a lot of things that I wanted to kind of gather my thoughts around, but I was just like, so buried in work that I couldn't really give the headspace, to have conversations with him about it. So it was basically like 2.5 months maybe before I was able to like collect my thoughts and what I thought about his initial pitch. And so I wrote down some concerns and things that I wanted to like talk to him about. And so when I had finished up the game, I'd asked if he'd go to lunch and chat about, some of the thoughts I had. And some of it was around that initial trailer, that first trailer that they showed, with it was like at the dance with Riley, or not Riley. Wow, my brain is
Was it Dina?
Dina. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Dina, they're dancing and kind of talking, and I had some commentary on that particular scene, and at that point he's like, "Well, we've already shot all the mocap for it, so and we're not going to really have a chance to go back and change that before we have to like air this trailer."
What were the
Mm.
suggestions that you would have
Um,
made?
I was just like suggesting that the the commentary about the like well, I wasn't convinced that these two women would be in the middle of this dance floor, like, making out in the first place. Like, I think that if that was happening, like, it would be kind of around the corner somewhere, like, kind of out of eyesight of, like, the main dance floor. Um, but that beat needed to be there. Like, that needed to be there so that the I don't know that dude's name, the guy that came up and ended up, like,
Oh
verbally
yeah, yeah.
assaulting, Ellie. He's like, "Well, that needs to be there, like, they need to be standing there so that can happen," and, so, it's just, like, conversations about like, my whole concern was, like, making it feel like it is, like, something that would genuinely happen between 2 women, um, and so, I mean, at that point, it had just like, too much time had already passed, they had already shot everything, they were moving forward, the whole pipeline was basically already moving, forward on that particular scene. So a lot of the other, like, input that I gave was around, like, I mean, there's, Lev, the trans character. Originally Lev was supposed to die earlier in the game, and so I was trying to advocate to, like, not have Lev go out that way. And so I was happy to see that Lev was one of the few few survivors at the end of The Last of Us 2. Um, just kinda subtle things that, like, little moments and beats that would happen that I was like, "Oh, just this if it was tweaked this way, it would feel more genuine, I guess." So that was always how I was approaching those conversations, was like, you know, if you want it to feel, uh, authentic, then here's my suggestions on this. But yeah, it was like a lot of the stuff he had already kind of had his mind set on, like, certain things needing to happen because of other beats that happened. So it became like much harder to like come in after the fact and like make suggestions. But if it was subtle stuff that could change, then he was open to hearing it. But if it was something that would require, understandably, right? Like, it,
Yeah, if it was going to change the entire pipeline or set things back majorly,
yeah,
then of
yeah.
course not.
Like,
Yeah.
go in and completely reshoot, and all the like facial anim and everything would have to change. Like, that would be a big cost to incur. So, um, where it made sense, we had conversations around it, and then I left shortly after that period because we were planning on moving back to the East Coast. So I knew that like I wasn't going to be there that whole production to kind of um, have those conversations over the long term. So I felt like I needed to just like dump it all out and be like, all right, here's all my thoughts, and then I don't remember the timing of it, but I probably left like less than 6 months after that. So it was
Was there any feeling within the studio at the time that Last of Us Part 2 was going to be controversial?
oh yeah. Yeah, yeah. Most of the studios like, really, you're gonna well, spoilers, right? Like,
Yeah.
I yes, I think the studio is pretty split on like the outcome of what happens. Yes, absolutely. It was controversial internally too. So
I guess if there's one positive from it, I guess you can say the story is definitely not forgettable, right? You definitely remember the story.
mhm,
So
yeah.
as controversial as it is. So was the main reason that you left Naughty Dog primarily for family? Did the crunch on Lost Legacy play a part in that as well? Was it
Oh,
just
I mean,
family?
yeah. I mean, it was. it had been a conversation with my spouse for quite a while to move back to the East Coast. Like, part of the plan of like moving out to LA to start at Naughty Dog was at some point we're gonna move back and like settle down and buy a house and start a family and that kind of thing. So that long term view had always been sitting there. But after Lost Legacy, it was starting to feel like it was time to kind of move on. But I did want to stick around on Last of Us 2 a little bit just to like play some sort of part in developing it and talking to Neil about some of the LGBTQ themes. Um, and mostly just to be able to say like, okay, I worked a
I worked on
considerable
this.
amount of time. Like if I had left 6 months or 3 months into development, it wouldn't have felt as impactful. But um, I felt like I worked all the way up until the vertical slice, and then I left immediately after the vertical slice. Yeah.
So how are things going with Hawthorne? Like, it
Wow.
blew up with the trailer and everything.
Yeah.
Obviously, you've got your own studio now, and especially in a time where there are so many layoffs, the industry seems to be in a dire place. How's everything going with the studio and the game
Yeah.
in terms of the timeline?
It's been a crazy journey. Um, if I would have known that it was going to be this winding to get this game out the door, um, yeah, I just assumed it was going to be a straightforward path of like raising money, making the game, getting the game out the door. But we've been on this bootstrapping path for, I mean, since the inception of the studio, and it's been like it's like I don't know, it's a lot of different emotions all kind of wrapped up into one because it's we're like excited and passionate about the thing that we're making, and we do get the autonomy and the like creative freedom to do this the way that we want to do it without you know a publisher or somebody telling us that we have to do certain things. So that part of it's nice. Obviously, being like this small team trying to build something very ambitious, we've had to be super sober with ourselves about like what we can actually deliver on. Um, we were pitching, thinking about this big grand scope game that like, would theoretically take like tens of millions of dollars to make. And once we realized that the environment wasn't conducive to raising money for any new IP and a new project, we decided, okay, we're just gonna like narrow our focus down on a particular subset of features that could be kind of its own standalone, and then we can expand on it after we get to early access. And so we've been very strategic about how we've been planning the game. So we're still thinking about and pitching this big idea of what the game will become, but we're having to kind of start small with what is essentially kind of the village life. So you've got these, Hawthorne is about um, anthropomorphic woodland animals in a fairy tale setting. So in it's very much inspired by Victorian era fairy tales. So when you think about like Andersen's stories and like Brothers Grimm and Wind in the Willows, these kind of like old classic fairy tale like children's stories. That that's kind of the setting that we're thinking of when we start developing out this game. And initially is this idea of like, you're an animal that is building up this village and you're meeting other animals, and it's we're blending colony sim and life sim elements in there as well. So like some of our comparison titles that we look at as inspiration is RimWorld for the colony sim side of it. It gets compared to like Animal Crossing or Stardew Valley on the like you have a village or a farm or whatever it is, and you're like building it up over time and you're building relationships with NPCs. That's the Stardew Valley side. And then it gets compared to Skyrim, um, mostly just because of our like backgrounds as Bethesda developers. And we have, Bruce Nesmith, who's the lead designer.
He's great.
Yeah,
I've spoken to him a number of times. He's a very wise man.
yeah, he's great. So we, when the Microsoft acquisition happened, a bunch of us left, and I had been poking him for like a year, just trying to get him to come and just like join and help out on the project. And eventually he agreed to it. He's somewhere between like a consultant and like a part-time
Because
person.
he's retired,
Y-
basically, right?
Yeah,
Or
yeah,
semi-retired. He's working on novels. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. He made it very clear to us that like he's like, this is gonna be your guys' game. I'll kind of act in like you know a consulting kind of like capacity and help out where I can. Yeah, his superpower is systems design, like balancing systems. So uh, Jason, my co-founder, has had conversations with him about systems and getting advice on stuff and kind of thinking about how he approaches systems design. And then once we have a, like the kind of core systems put together, we would have him do like a balancing pass on it to be like, how would you balance out this economy? What like what kind of things would you be thinking about? Um, so that's kind of his role. I mean, he's touched pretty much every single Bethesda game,
Yeah.
every system in every Bethesda game. So he's a wealth of knowledge when it comes to just like gotchas that you don't really think about until you're in it and you're like, oh, I didn't think about how this system and this system and this system would butt up against each other and cause this weird thing to happen. Um, but yeah, so I mean, just by nature of us being a bunch of Bethesda devs, we get that like Skyrim, uh, I guess, note kind of tied to us, which initially we were kind of crapping our pants a little bit because we knew that we knew we weren't going to raise the money that we needed to make the big ambitious Skyrim scoped game. And so when journalists came out and said it's Skyrim meets Stardew Valley, we were like, oh no, like we're going to think this is like Skyrim scoped, like that's going to be bad for us. Um, but then, the more we did it, we're like, well, I mean, our big grand vision is closer to that, like, and it is a good tagline. Like maybe we should just like roll with that. So and that's kind of the like the struggle that we have right now, where it's like in our big grand vision, if we had all the money that we needed to make the thing, like yes, we would feel confident in saying that like we would want this to be something of the scope that Skyrim would be. Um, but where we are currently, because we are literally like self-funding and crowdfunding this project, uh, we have to kind of focus around the village simulation, colony sim side of things. And then over time, we'll expand out and build more of the adventure content. More, we'll add combat to the game. We're trying to be very strategic about how we scope the game up as we go.
Yeah, fair enough.
But yeah,
Do you have any aspirations in terms of like a release date?
we don't have any announcements on release date. I mean, it's still up. I mean, it's in motion because we're actively planning our like we're actually raising money. We are also in discussions about other alternatives. So, depending on what our funding situation is, the date changes. So, I mean, we're just constantly looking at how do we push the date out longer to give us more time? How do we, we always want more time to polish and add more content and make it more robust. So, whenever we are able to do that, we will take that opportunity if it makes sense for the project. If it, I will say one thing: we have gotten publishing offers, but we have turned them down or have like pushed back on some of the terms. And ultimately, we're not going to take a deal that we feel doesn't set the team up for success like in the future.
Yeah. Or compromises the game,
Yeah.
I suppose, as well. Yeah. And I suppose you can spin it into a positive, like some of the most creative problem solving comes from limitations. Some of the best games that were ever made were based on limitations, right? So
Yeah.
that's your superpower in a way.
Yeah. Yeah. I will say coming from Naughty Dog and Bethesda, two very different studios, different philosophies, different cultures, very different types of games they make. Like I feel like it's given me this really nice balanced view on like how to kind of take bits and pieces of each to kind of create something that hopefully blends uh hopefully what each of those studios exceed at. Um And I don't know. My hope is that we find kind of a nice baseline of polish and like vibe and experience that we want to like portray to the player. And it might be this kind of like tightly scoped thing, but that experience was so enjoyable and so unique that they're like, I'm here for the like long haul. And as we continue to expand out the game, it becomes the thing that like we all want it to be, which is like this big world that you can go out and adventure with your friends or your like NPC companions, and you kind of get into these like misadventures and get into trouble and all sorts of like kind of strange happenings as you're out in the world. Those are the things that like open world sandboxes do really well with, like these different systems and emergent gameplay like just kind of shows up, and we want to get there eventually. And that's the
You
stuff
will. You
that's
will.
the stuff that we do really well, I would say. But we're having to focus on that like colony sim, life sim feeling first. And what we're hoping players will take away from that is that they establish this kind of peaceful village, and they get to know the characters that are there, and they actually care about them. And like by the time we start adding more regions around the outskirts and add you know conflict or some sort of like problem for these inhabitants to solve, you're more invested in the characters and you want to actually be there and protect them and like you know save what you've built, right? So like that's the hope, right? We build a vibe, people get in there and enjoy like the characters and what's there, and then we keep expanding it out, and it becomes more and more meaningful over time because you've kind of grown with it. So that's the hope.
Well, it's ambitious, and I'm rooting for you. I'm
Thanks.
sure it'll all work out. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
appreciate it.
I know time's getting on, so I just had a few questions here from the community, if I can quickly ask you, if
Yeah,
that's
of
okay.
course.
Yeah. Okay, this one here is from, I don't even know how to pronounce this, Niers Gov. What are the differences between, you've kind of covered this a little bit, what are the differences between Naughty Dog and Bethesda's environmental art kits pipeline? With a proper pipeline, would the creation engine be able to run assets at the level of Naughty Dog?
So Naughty Dog, it's a philosophy. So I think that's where the structural differences are. Like Naughty Dog tends to be like perfection at all costs. They want every little nook and cranny to be highly polished. Bethesda is more of a like just quantity, get stuff in. We can go back and make it look better later, even though you never do because there's never time to go back to anything. Um, so it's a mindset that is very different between the two studios. Uh, is is Bethesda's tech capable of hitting the same kind of level of polish as Naughty Dog's tech? Yeah. I think the difference is the type of game, right? Like Naughty Dog has a linear, it's a narrative linear path through. They can kind of load and unload stuff in a very linear way. It's like, okay, we're no longer going to be using this section of the level and this logic. Like it's all very bespoke. So you go from one section to the next section. All of that is like, I don't want to say all of it, but a lot of it on the design side is kind of unique to that moment. And then as soon as that beat's done, they unload that logic and then load in the next kind of bespoke section. So I would say there's very little reuse from like level to level at Naughty Dog. That's just the way that they've structured their teams. I mean, that might be changing now. I mean, I can say that that's how it's been up until at least The Last of Us 2. But at Bethesda with these big open world games, you never know at any given point what thing is going to be kind of spawned into the world. Um, so you can't possibly like know to load and unload certain sections or like certain game logic, because any new system that bumps up to something else would cause something to spawn, and it kind of creates this like chain reaction. So just a different kind of game. You're having to like think about performance differently for an open world game. So it's you can't really compare like apples and oranges, basically.
Yeah, I mean, some of the Bethesda devs have said to me, this is kind of like a motto of Todd Howard is, we can do anything, but we can't do everything. So you have to basically prioritize what is most important. And I imagine for both companies, the prioritization would be different based on the type of game that they're making.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
But oftentimes it does feel like Bethesda's trying to do everything. I get close to it. Yeah, I mean, Naughty Dog's like priority is the narrative. They want to tell a particular story, and so everything around gameplay supports that narrative. Bethesda, very, very different experience. You know, the player experience is very different. Players have agency. Every player story is different. It's a sandbox, so you kind of make what you want of it.
Yeah. Did you meet Todd while you were there at all, or no?
Yeah, Todd was he was apparently was supposed to be in my interview, but was traveling, and then when I got back, he ran into me in the hallway and knew who I was, and I was like, "Oh, hi." He's like, said that he's I don't know, he wanted to go to lunch, so it was like me, my art director, our like senior producer, and Todd all went out to lunch. I don't know, after I'd been there for a week, and he actually was asking me a lot of questions about what it was like to work with Neil. Because I got the sense that he kind of either idolized Neil or wanted to kind of understand his process or something like that. So that was it took me by surprise because I was like, oh, okay, so kind of I don't know, felt like he was a bit of a fanboy on on Neil Druckmann, which was interesting. And then come to find out that like the I don't know if like the Fallout series discussions were happening at that point, but I'm pretty sure that like the HBO show had already shipped or had been announced or something like that. So I think there was a little bit of like, I mean, I don't know, maybe it's competition. I'm not sure what it was, but he was just asking a lot of questions of like what it was like working with Neil and, you know, what it was like working at Naughty Dog. And then I would run into him occasionally in the halls and he'd ask how things are going with like the layered material system. Um, so yeah, I don't know Neil. I don't know Todd very well, but I did have a few occasions to talk to him. So yeah.
That's cool. Well, you've gotten to work under some pretty important people in the game industry.
I'm very fortunate.